Welcome to the Omnibus Show, a program for people who are interested in everything, with deep conversations on a wide variety of subjects. And now your host, Dave Gibbs.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Omnibus Show, the program for people who are interested in everything, with deep conversations on a wide variety of subjects. This week's guest is Jerry Torr, who is the state representative in the state of Indiana, House District 39. And he will be retiring after this season, after being in office for 3 decades. Jerry, you've done a lot, but congratulations on that length. But welcome to the show. It's great to have you on.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I'd also like to add, he's an Indiana boy, grew up in Putnam County. He studied at Hanover College down in Hanover, and also out in Hollywood at the Musicians Institute, and came back to Indiana, and is also involved in insurance, which we will get into. But it's great having you on. But before we get into the political side, you went to Musicians Institute. Can you tell us about your musical side? I find that fascinating.
Oh, thank you. Actually, it was I was in the first graduating class. Initially, it was called the Guitar Institute.
Yes.
It became the Musicians Institute a few years later as they added other instruments. But the first class was about 60 guitar players from all over the country, most interested in playing jazz and blues and rock and a couple of country players. But we had a course in orchestration and film scoring, composition, and that's what I really got interested in. And
That's fascinating.
So really enjoyed that. It was a great experience. I was there for about a year and a half.
Yeah.
It was a professional school. We weren't studying anything but music. No
music.
math, no English, nothing.
As I said before, I had a buddy who when I lived in Seattle, who had studied at Guitar Institute. I guess that was the section by then, because it was after you had been there. But he called it Guitar. It was probably the Guitar Institute part of the Musicians Institute. However, He named it. That's what he said. But he wanted to be another famous shredder. But he went on into the work world. But no, that's very, very fascinating. Can you tell us a little more about what did you want to do with that, with your music?
Well, studied with Mundell Lowe, who was a prolific jazz guitar player, but also wrote music for several TV shows and a few movies and television movies. I remember coming home at Christmas, and there was, I think, one of those Andy Griffith specials or something. Mm-hmm. Not the Andy Griffith Show.
There's a holiday special.
But and he gave me some of the score sheets.
Nice.
And the timing sheets. They have these timing sheets where it spells out every second what's happening on the screen, and then he writes the music to go with that. And of course, they can edit it both ways.
Yes.
A little bit, but he kind of really took me under his wing because I was the only one out of the 60 that really was terribly interested in his class.
Oh, interesting.
And so that's, by the time I'd been there just a few months, what I really wanted to do was write music for films.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's because there's so many fabulous. That's always been a thing for me, because I wanted to make movies as a kid, and I'd have to say my top 3 were Maurice Jarre and Henry Mancini.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
And it definitely is those 2. And the third one would be John Barry, who the theme of the show, which is on the audio podcast, was written for an Elizabeth Taylor program in the 60s, and it's called Jazz Waltz.
Right.
And he liked doing things, just to get musical for a moment, he liked playing the strings in the high range. That's the Bond thing. is the strings being in the real.
Right.
That must be to get the tension up, to play the strings in the high range, and so those are the three. Do you have a favorite movie composer that you wish you could have been an assistant with?
Oh, sure. I'm a big fan of John Williams.
Oh yeah, he's great.
Henry Mancini that you mentioned. He had a book.
He had the tunes. He could do tunes very well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He had a book called Sounds and Scores that I learned an awful lot from.
Yeah.
It was an oversized book, I think, just with a plastic binder, and it was one of those, like so many composition and orchestration books. It came with some 45 records.
Did it really?
Yeah.
It had records in it, actually. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, I heard about that because that particular book had the recording that he did for the Rachel Ward movie where she played the gal in Australia. It was a hammer dulcimer tune with Richard Chamberlain. It was about 40 years ago.
Yeah.
I can't think of the title right now, but
Yeah.
that tune was like, I think people were looking for it, and that's the only place they could find it was in the book.
Yeah. Yeah, Henry Mancini was doing an awful lot at the time, and if I had stayed in California after I graduated,
Yeah.
that's probably one of the shops where I would have tried to get work as an assistant.
Okay.
To get more experience, because I had a couple of connections to him. Never met him, but had a couple of connections that I think could have resulted in a meeting.
Fabulous. Well, that's fascinating. And as I spoke about earlier, I had a trip over to London and I had a tour of Abbey Road in 2001, and Studio One was being redone. They were remodeling it, and that was that's the studio where they primarily do film score.
Right.
And John Williams has been there a number of times,
Sure.
and so that's a big deal. And but that is fascinating. Yeah, John Williams. He's quite a composer with all the the Star Trek and
Yeah.
and,
When I met him,
or Star Wars. Sorry.
Star Wars,
and,
yeah.
Indiana Jones.
yeah, when I met him, Tommy Tedesco, who was a very prolific studio guitar player, and probably the best sight reader guitar player that ever played the instrument.
And that's something, because I tried that as a kid.
And by the way, one of the funniest people that ever walked the planet, God rest his soul. But he asked me one day, he knew that I was really interested in Mundell's class. He did a few seminars. He wasn't full-time, obviously, at school because he was making too much money. But he said, hey, I got a gig with John Williams tomorrow. Would you like to go? And I said, well, of course I would. And so I went with him, and that day they were just recording with a small jazz combo. And during a break, he introduced me to John Williams, and the guy couldn't have been more magnanimous. He spent a lot of time with me talking about what he did and what I wanted to do, and as the break was ending, he said, hey, I've got a 90-piece orchestra coming in here tomorrow. Would you like to come back? And I said, I think I can get out of school for that. So that was a great experience.
That's fabulous. I'm really glad you had that, because music. I think music people. I want to say it's not about being superior, but there's a bigger mindedness type of, and I mean that in a positive way, in the sense that it makes you think in a way that's like, some people say out of the box, but it's like very big, and I
think it's more like, why does there have to be a box?
Does there have to be a box? Yeah, because music is like, when you get to know music people, if you're in that circle, you get to know everybody. Because the thing is, the people they get beyond that teenage thing of this is my style and all this, they don't care, because they could play like the Wrecking Crew.
Oh, gosh.
You know, those guys played everything for everybody.
Well, Tommy Tedeschi that I mentioned was a big part of the record.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, he's part of the Wrecking Crew, and wasn't he kind of the big cheese in there, or one of the big? Maybe it's his son that wrote the book about.
His son did the documentary.
Documentary.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
what it was.
Yes.
That's what I remember.
Yeah, but before he went out and became a star on his own, Glenn Campbell was a part of that group.
Yeah, he was. He did lots of.
Carol Kay,
The bass player.
the bass player, who was phenomenal.
She and James Jamerson are like, for session players, are like the top two.
Yeah, and what people don't understand about the Wrecking Crew, and most of us have heard them play a million times in our lives, had no idea who they were, but what they did was just remarkable. Like Carol Kay, the one thing I really remember about her, The Beat Goes On, Sonny and Cher, recorded with the Wrecking Crew. And Carol Kay came up with that iconic bass, bum, bum, bum.
Oh,
bum,
gotcha.
bum, bum,
Yeah.
bum. That song's nothing without that bass piece.
That riff changes the whole thing. That is the song.
That would never have been a hit
Right.
had Carol Kay not played the bass on that.
Played the bass.
And people don't,
Hopefully she got royalties for that.
for the studio people, I don't know how that works, but I
They were hired hands.
Yeah, I don't
They're
think,
basically,
I
you
don't think
get
so.
$5 an hour or whatever they paid them back then.
Yeah.
But they were constantly working. Well, bringing that back to Indiana, I mean, we could talk music all day long. Eventually, you made it back to Hoosier, and what I really am interested in is, because you've been involved in some, well, here I'm going to do this. We'll talk about your greatest hits. We'll use a musical allusion. In these 3 decades, Jerry's been involved in bringing in the Daylight Savings Time, the Health Insurance Waiver Act. You did try eliminating gerrymandering, which both sides always go at each other about. You gerrymandered. No, you gerrymandered, And the right to work, which I think is very, very important. And then we'll talk afterwards about what's forthcoming. But being able to work, that's a very important thing. That's something. I've been both an executive and in a union, and it's good for the executive to get in. Their job is to take care of the company and make sure everything's working and they're making money and everybody's working, all hands are on deck. Yeah. And then with workers, it's like they're doing their job, but it's also important, I think, for having representation. Yeah. Can I be on both sides on that?
But you can, because a lot of people called this an anti-union bill.
Yeah, of course they would.
I never viewed it that way.
Right.
And in fact, I just recently learned that there was one trade union up in Northwest Indiana that supported the bill. Mm-hmm. And there was another union that always asked me, their lobbyists down at State House, said, they didn't want it public, but that they supported it too.
Sure, I understand.
It was a public union that didn't have forced dues payments.
Gotcha.
And they said the other unions should work for their members just like we do.
Right.
But
and it probably encouraged. Yeah. I'm taking a guess here, but I'm taking it also encouraged people to come into in other words, maybe they'll join the union eventually because their right to work is that they're kind of joining the crowd. And if you're a smaller group, you want more people playing. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? That helps in representation when you're trying to get a league together.
Yeah, we were in the minority. I was the ranking minority member of the House Labor Committee.
Yes.
And a fellow from up around the Elkhart South Bend area just sought me out one day at the State House. We had a conversation right out the House chamber in the hallway. And he told me about right to work. He was retired, but he said, I was forced to pay dues to the union for years that I didn't want to belong to, didn't want to be associated with. I'd never heard of the term before. I didn't know it was an issue.
You mean right to work?
Right to work, yeah.
Right.
But I started studying it. I looked at a couple of studies, one from the Allegheny Institute and one from Mackinac, that both, one talked about border states. We didn't have a single border state that was right to work. And the other looked at loops, like 465 and 469 around the south side of Fort Wayne and
Yes.
so forth. That in conjunction with a right to work law brought more manufacturing jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And I was convinced that a right to work law in the middle of the Midwest with no right to work states around us would be a jobs magnet. And that's what I focused on. I put a PowerPoint presentation together, and I'd go anywhere in the state where I could get at least 6 or 8 people to sit out and listen to me talk about it. And I worked on it for 8 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then finally, one day I talked Speaker Bosma into letting me make a presentation to our caucus. And I did. We had a little bit of discussion. He said, "How many of you think we ought to go ahead with this?" Almost every hand in the room went up. And we scheduled it for committee the next day. That was 2011 when the House Democrats took off for Illinois.
Oh, yes.
To deny us a quorum
That's
for
right,
6
they
weeks.
did.
So the next year, we decided to make it House Bill 1001 our top priority. You know, in the odd number of years, that's usually the budget bill. But in 2012, 1001 was right to work. And Speaker Bosma got some folks to pay for some polling so we could see what public opinion was. And I'd always focused on bringing jobs to Indiana, but we found out through the polling that what really resonated with the voters was just the freedom of the individual worker to decide whether or not they wanted to associate with the union.
Mm-hmm.
That's what rang true with the voters.
Sure.
So it took me 8 years, but and a lot of people told me I'd never get it done, but 2012 we got it done.
Well, that's good. I mean, that I see both sides in terms of the needs, but the thing is, when the interests tie up things, it always falls on the backs of the worker, and there needs to be something to help the worker. And actually, in this instance, this is something that I think would help a person who's just not involved in the politics of all those different corporation
it
things.
Doesn't deprive anybody of the right to be a member of a union.
Right.
It just allows them to opt out if they choose to.
Right. And but we know the history of if you're not working, the scab, words that are tossed at people and so forth. But that's crossing the picket line is what that's about. But no, that's a very important thing to a lot of people. But going back on your history, when you came back, when you started, I've kind of jumped towards your greatest hits. But when you started, what got you in? What were the milestones, little and big, that drew you once you got back from California?
Well, I'd always been involved a little bit in politics. My twin brother's first job out of college was working for the Orr for Governor campaign. I'd been a precinct committeeman when I was 18. Never really thought about running for office myself until I got into my mid to late 30s. Property taxes were kind of out of control at the time, like they're getting to be again now.
Yeah.
And had stepkids in public school, working in a highly regulated industry. The insurance industry is state regulated. And just kind of all that came together. I realized how much state government can affect our daily lives. And so what I said at the time is, I'm just not sure I trust somebody else to do it the way I think it ought to be done.
So you did the Davy Crockett. Went to
Yeah,
Washington.
I guess so, yeah.
There you go. Well, there's nothing like, and then of course you've been in insurance these years.
Yeah, 40-some years.
40-some years. And Hamilton is now Near North Title Group, right? right? Isn't
That's
that
correct.
formerly
Yeah.
Hamilton?
Yeah, I've been in title insurance for a little over 10 years. Prior to that, property casualty for over 30. Claims for 25 years of that, which was really interesting. I could do a whole podcast on interesting claim scenarios, but yeah.
Or you could do a TV series on that.
Oh,
Yeah, it's
probably.
the Perry Mason of insurance.
But yeah, it's been a nice career.
Fabulous. Excuse me. Well, we're coming up on you're on the fourth turn of the last season, or of the race, I should put it that way, to use an Indianapolis term, Indy 500. What would you like to share with the audience about this last season? Any public bills or anything that is coming up this season?
Coming up in the next session?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll tell you.
Well, first, what's coming up in your time in office?
Yeah, there were a few things I tried to do over the years that were too big of a lift, even for a Republican supermajority. Most having to do with tort liability issues. But the one bill I carried for a number of years and passed the House in the 2023 session.
Yeah.
And got stalled in Senate committee on a tie vote when one member who had told me if he was there he would have voted for it wasn't there. But that is a bill that would provide for free and open bidding for public works projects.
I see.
Allowing non-union and union contractors to be on the same footing.
Okay.
Which in places where we live in Hamilton County is usually the case, but there are cities and counties, most notably Northwest Indiana and Evansville and Fort Wayne, areas like that, where the local governments will decide they're going to enter into what's called a project labor agreement, which ostensibly cuts out the non-union contractors from
the blue zones.
From being able to bid.
Yes.
And that seems unfair not only to the non-union contractors, but to taxpayers, because
Gotcha.
that will artificially drive the price up.
Of course, because of all of the my father was in Chicago TV, so I grew up with those stories very young. I heard about these things, but no, that's very important. And
so I hope that will pass in the next year or two.
Okay, that would be quite good for, just the bottom line for the public is really the best value. Who can do the
Right.
job the best? And if a union does that, awesome. And if non-union does that, awesome. Now, some people aren't going to like to hear that, but really, what you're trying to achieve, I'm listening, is that you're trying to get the best value for the public, which is very helpful. Also, one of the things I didn't mention, which I have in my notes, is that the Indiana Chamber of Commerce gave you the Government Leader of the Year award, and you're of just a handful of Hoosier politicians who've received that twice.
That's true.
Yeah. So congratulations on that. That's quite a big deal when you get an award like that.
The first one was 2005, after I had kind of pushed daylight saving time through the General Assembly.
Gotcha.
A lot of people credited Governor Daniels. He did talk about it a little bit during the campaign. It was not on his legislative agenda for 2005, nor was it in our House Republican agenda for 2005. I just kept pressing to get a committee hearing. And then Randy Borer, who chaired Commerce Committee, once that committee heard all the testimony from all the business people explaining ways that most of us would never even think of, that their businesses got screwed up because we didn't change time. And after that committee meeting, Randy was my biggest supporter, and I just kept pushing until we got it through. I did say at the chamber dinner that night, though, I said, we all know the real government leader of the year in 2005 was Governor Daniels, for a whole host of reasons, daylight saving time being one of the least of them. But that was a big deal to the chamber.
Well, he did do a lot
Now,
for the
Now, in
state.
2012, it was after my 8 years of pressing to make Indiana a right-to-work state.
Yes.
And I remember saying, 2005, I wasn't sure I was really the number one government leader that year, but I said,
Gotcha.
2012, I'll take it for this right to work, because the economic development folks will all tell you that's been a real game changer for bringing employers to Indiana.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would think that would be, especially with all the regulations in the states around us, Illinois particularly, Michigan, and then Ohio. Maybe less so Kentucky, but still, yeah, in the donut states, if you will. Well, moving towards conclusion, can you give us some thoughts about, post your era with the Indiana legislature in local and national? What do you see ahead, or what do you see that the focus might be on the new year?
It's interesting. We're all replaceable. Every time we had a member leave, that we thought, wow, who's going to take his place in public policy, chairmanship, or whatever, there was always somebody that stepped up. And I won't say that I regret my decision, because I'm sure happy not to be campaigning right now.
Gotcha.
But during this past session, I saw a couple of bills from some of our newer members. One, to repeal daylight saving time in Indiana.
It's like that old song, the Duke of York. When they were up, they were up. When they were down, they were down.
and they brought back special prices for happy hour for bars, because they're not old enough to remember that people actually died. Although they didn't allow the 2-for-1, which
you mean drinking too much?
Yeah, but the real problem with what was outlawed, that was a real problem, was the 2-for-1 that encouraged people to stock up before 6 o'clock.
Oh, gotcha. So pack it in.
So at least they didn't bring that part back.
Yeah.
But going forward, I think next session, they're going to have to tackle the property tax issue, the rising assessments in the suburban areas. It's going to be a difficult thing, because different parts of the state have different things going on with, some rural areas, they're not seeing assessment increases and property tax increases. And so,
isn't it mostly going on in the suburbs and
yeah,
in the cities?
and so it's hard to find that target fix that's going to take care of the folks whose home values are rising inexplicably. But
Noblesville thinks my house is a Hollywood mansion.
Right. Yeah, but I think that's something that General Assembly. In fact, frankly, I was surprised we didn't try to do at least something on that this past session. So I think that's going to be the big one going forward. Nationally, boy, I don't know. It just depends on how the election goes. And, the country is so divided, and it seems to be getting more and more so. I used to think it was just the 10 or 15% extremes on both sides, and then 60 or 70% of us in the middle that wanted to be more.
Most people just want to live their daily lives.
Right, exactly. And I still think that's where a majority of the people are. But the divisiveness seems to be getting harsher and harsher. And I don't know how we. I don't know how we get past that, but it's going to take a unifying leader to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, that will. That's certainly the wise answer of what it would definitely unifying leader. But I don't see that right now, personally. And that's like opening Pandora's box, saying that on the show. But that's something that, you hope and pray that the wisdom will rule. So we hope for the best, and we just have to carry on. And hopefully what we'll do is whoever gets in is that we'll work, put up a white flag and just work for 4 or 5 years and just keep at it, which would be a good thing. Well, for conclusion, anything else, Jerry, that's coming up? Now that you're retiring from politics, although you are still involved with the Tidal Group.
Oh, yeah.
What's next for Jerry?
Well, I'm not sure what doors might open. Right now, I intend to just continue marketing title insurance, chasing those commercial real estate deals.
And the flight to Florida is at what time?
Oh, no, probably not. Although I would like to get back down to, my ex and I had a cottage in the Panhandle near Seaside.
Nice.
I would like to get back down there sometime. I went a little crazy during COVID and bought 7 new guitars.
I'm a guitar guy too, so I know exactly what I see. All these memes on social media about "don't tell my wife," or the last one was they're all the way to so your wife won't notice is buy them all the same color.
I've seen the same meme with 2 guys, and it looks like the way they're dressed, it's like 1940s or something, and they're both laughing hysterically, and the caption of the meme either says, "My wife said if you buy a new guitar, you're going to sell the old one, right?" Or your other version I've seen is, "My wife said if you buy a new gun, you're going to sell the old one, right?"
That's a great.
But I've got a great collection of not valuable guitars, but fun guitars, and a couple jazz boxes and some.
That could be a whole nother.
And some solid body and a couple acoustic guitars, and so I hope I can find more time to spend with those.
Well, fabulous. That's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Jerry. It was great having you on today's program.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed it.
Well, that is it for today's program, and we'd like to thank Jerry Torr for being our guest today in his it's the 4th turn of this last session as state representative for the state of Indiana. We'd like to thank our sponsor, Hotel Carmichael. We're recording today in Feinstein's, and we look forward to being with you on the next episode of The Omnibus Show.
If you enjoyed this program, please like, share, and subscribe to continue the conversation. For the Omnibus Show newsletter, please sign up at theomnibusshow.com.